So, I have a confession to make. I have been totally sucked in by the Pieper versus OJ Simpson. For those of you who aren't familiar with it, it's an FX series that follows the 1995 trial of a Heisman Award-winning professional football player / successful actor who was accused of double homicide against his supermodel wife and a friend of hers. And as the series progressed, I found myself getting more and more defensive of the lead prosecutor, Marcia Clark. And she was just subjected to this ongoing barrage of harassment and mudslinging from the media, making fun of her hair, saying her clothes weren't stylish enough, that she's not pretty enough, or that she's not soft-spoken enough, to the defense in court, calling her a hysterical woman in front of the jury, to the judge sitting from the bench making fun of her hair, or her supervisor saying, I realize this is so sexist and it's awful, but maybe you should see a media consultant. And her personal life gets dragged into it, with her ex-husband publishing nude photos of her in tabloids, and her current estranged husband doing a press conference to talk about how she works late hours and is an unfit mother, and bringing their personal custody battles into the public light for everyone to see. And all of this came to a head for me about halfway through the series, when Marcia changed her hair. And I found myself literally yelling at the television, Marcia, what are you doing? How can you be doing this? How can you let them get to you like this? You, this confident woman, how can you let them get to you? Don't you see how much worse it's gonna be now? And I was just so outraged, so incredibly outraged that I could hardly sleep that night. And I woke up the next morning still really upset about it, and just kind of laughing at myself at the absurdity of being this upset about a fictionalized dramatization of a trial that occurred 20 years ago, right? Obviously, that stuff didn't happen. Obviously, they didn't really obviously, Judge Ito did not sit on the bench and make fun of her hair in front of the jury. That didn't happen. Obviously, Johnny Cochran, who was the lead defense, did not sit there and call her a hysterical woman in front of the jury. Come on, I'm sure the tabloids were making fun of her or whatever, but clearly this is dramatized. So I went online to check it out and find out how dramatized it was. And it turns out it wasn't. All that stuff really happened. Someone had cobbled together video of the judge in court belittling her in front of the jury. And someone had cobbled together videos of just, little snippets of all of the time the defense humiliated her for personal reasons in front of the jury in court. And you can see here, this is an example of how much she allowed the media to affect her, the tabloids. Here's her kind of 80s perm that they're making fun of. So she jazzes it up a little, she gets it cut. And then the headlines are curls of horror, Marcia, hair verdict, guilty. So she changes it again into these smooth waves. She, one of the most powerful women in the world at that time, presumably, because she is lead prosecutor on the most high-profile trial ever to be tried, is allowing the media to affect the way she presents herself to the world. And I was stunned that all of this really happened. And while I was, just kind of poking around on Google, one of the things that I saw was an interview that they had done with Marcia Clark after the series wrapped up, which was just last week. And they asked her, if the trial was held today, do you think anything would be different? Do you think you would be treated any differently? And her response was, absolutely not. Nothing has changed. And has it? Is she wrong? When we have a presidential frontrunner who touts among his qualifications to be president the fact that his wife is hotter than Ted Cruz's, and not just does he say it, but people continue to vote for him. People continue to support him. Was she wrong? Absolutely not. I work for a large consulting firm. And as such, we recruit students from top universities, recruit candidates with top GPAs, top qualifications, great skills, great internships. And last fall, I was at an interview day interviewing candidates from Georgia Tech. And this day was like no other. The candidates were great. I was interviewing 11 individuals, 5 females and 6 males. And again, because it's a large firm, everything is choreographed about the interview from start to finish. You know, I have a folder full of resumes and a list of interview questions and a list of acceptable answers. And one of the questions I was supposed to ask this day was, let's say you've been working with a client for a while and you're working on a product for them, some sort of deliverable. And after about 6 weeks, your manager comes into you and says, hey, I think you're going about this the wrong way. What do you do? You know, the acceptable answer is anything that suggests that they can be flexible, that even at this late date, they can make changes and roll with the punches and they don't get too bent out of shape. And each of the 5 women answered approximately the same way, something to the effect of, hey, well, I'd work with my manager to understand where I got off track and to correct things as quickly as possible. And then I'd later work with him to understand where I went wrong so that it didn't happen again. I'm great at taking constructive criticism, you know, which is a great answer. Each of the men answered exactly the same way. Not the same as the women, but exactly the same as each other, which I found fascinating. Each of them said, well, I'd work with the manager to understand where I went wrong, and then I'd explain to him why I'm actually right. And then they'd go on to say something about how, you know, they're flexible and they can take criticism if they're actually wrong. They'd make the changes. But I found that so incredibly fascinating that every single one of the women walked out of that question, walked away with, I'm wrong because someone told me I was. And every single one of the men walked away with, I'm right until someone proves otherwise. And I found that so interesting. As these women aren't shrinking violets, you know, these are accomplished, confident women, presidents of their large sororities. One of them sat on the International Pan-Hellenic Council. One of them, she did an internship with IBM in Sri Lanka, for goodness sakes. These are women who have done stuff, who know stuff. They still just assume that they're wrong because someone told them that they were. And I found myself wondering if this is an individual example, if this is just one example, or if this is something that maybe stretches beyond this one interview that I'm doing. Yes, it was 100% of the people that I interviewed had these kind of responses, but does it go beyond that? So I started looking and kind of examining my professional career a bit. And 2 women in particular came up, Eileen and Rachel. Eileen is someone that I worked with on a project a while ago. I was doing a system implementation. I was the project manager, and she was brought on to help me take notes and, you know, do status reporting and things like that. And it became clear very quickly that she was vastly underutilized in that capacity, that she's really clever, really sharp, really motivated. And our relationship grew to be much more collaborative. You know, I'd bounce ideas off of her. She would help me come up with holes in our thinking, things that I wasn't able to see because I was too engulfed in it. And we'd prep for meetings and we'd go in and I'd have all of these ideas bubbling around in my head and Eileen would be silent. She'd never speak up. And, you know, we'd get to a point where I knew she had something really, really awesome to say and she wouldn't say a word. And I'd call on her, hey, Eileen, what about the thing you mentioned? And she, you know, she'd speak up and afterwards we'd debrief and I'd say, Eileen, what's going on? What about all those great things that you mentioned? Why didn't you bring those up? And her response was, you know, I just didn't think they were that important. I didn't think it was that great of an idea. I didn't think it was that valuable. And it was so surprising to me because something that I saw as so incredibly valuable, she didn't. And as time went on, I was going to be rolling off the project and we were looking for a succession plan. And my recommendation was Eileen. And everyone was really surprised because she was so young. She was 23 and straight out of school, but there was no doubt in my mind that she was the only person who could fill this role. We had a super, super difficult client who was very difficult to manage, and I felt like she was the only one who could manage that relationship. And so she did step into the role, and she told me later that she felt like her mama bird had pushed her out of the nest. And pardon the cliche, but that baby bird flew. She not only flew, she soared. She dazzled the client. She dazzled the management. She did so great. And since then, she's been promoted, and she's gotten into this really exclusive, competitive, high-profile leadership program where she's going to be promoted again. And I have no doubt that I'm going to be working for her at some point. But it just still, I'm a little bit taken aback by how much she undervalued herself and it was so set in contrast by these other men who came on at the same time, other new hires who would not only not undervalue themselves, but almost overvalue their contributions. They'd speak up in meetings when they didn't really seem to have anything to say. They'd almost as if they're talking to be heard or to hear their own voices. And it was just very interesting to see the two set in light. The other example is Rachel. Rachel is one of those top candidates I was telling you about earlier. She has her undergrad from Barnard, her master's degree from Columbia. Being from these elite universities, an elite women's college, women's issues are interwoven throughout her entire academic career. Rachel gets women's issues. She gets the confidence thing. She gets gender gap. And for the most part, she breaks the mold of that kind of unconfident woman that I was talking about earlier, except when she doesn't. She's somebody who will pick a hill and she will die on that hill. And if I tell her no to something, that girl will make sure I understand what I am saying no to before she lets it drop, which is great because I'm wrong a lot of the times and I don't realize it. But a lot of other times I'll ask her a question and she'll say, oh my gosh, I did that wrong, I'm so sorry, or did I mess that up? And I'm like, no, you're not wrong, I just don't know where that came from, and I need to be able to quote that source in case someone asks me, I just want to know. But she automatically jumps to that conclusion that she's wrong, simply because I asked her a question. And, again, 3 anecdotes, Georgia Tech, Eileen, Rachel, that's not a systemic problem. But it does make me wonder, and it made me wonder, all right, well, all these young women seem to have these confidence problems, but what about, I'm not underconfident. My senior managers and partners aren't underconfident. We have women who achieve great things. What is missing here? And so I went to someone who I thought was very confident. And I went to talk to her about confidence in general. And if she had been like this, if she had noticed these same things when she was 22, did she have these same confidence issues? And she said, no, actually. I've been like this forever. When I was 15, 20, 25, I've always been able to set goals and go after them. I get what I want. I've never had a confidence problem. But one thing that she did mention was that until she got married, she didn't realize how she would come across to others. She would have this confidence, but she was an elite athlete, and she would go into a race going, oh my gosh, I'm gonna do so terribly, I'm not prepared for this, I'm gonna fail. And her husband would say to her, why are you talking like this? You know you're not gonna fail, you know you've trained really hard, you know you've hired great coaches. Why would you say that about yourself? Why not project that confidence that you know you have? And so she started really focusing on that, and that's what I noticed. That's who I see at work. And when she goes to meetings, she makes sure and focuses very closely on not using weak language. She focuses very closely on how she projects herself to make sure that she doesn't say things like, you know what I mean? Or, I could be wrong, but apologetic language, asking permission for things, or don't you agree? Well, I just want to say that, I guess, things that undermine what she's trying to say. And that's, I think, what I see in her. When she says something, I listen because she knows exactly what she's talking about. And I started wondering, all right, so our 30-year-old women project confidence. Our 22-year-old women should have confidence, but they're not projecting it. What's happening here? What's going wrong that our women have the confidence but aren't projecting it? They're not letting the world know what value that they have. And I started, what's happening between the ages of 22 and 30 that's not happening between the ages of 15 and 22? What is being built in those years between being a new hire and a manager that's not happening between a high school student and a college grad? And I really started looking at the different situations that you're in. Academia versus business. And in academia, you absolutely have strong, powerful women. You have professors who are incredibly accomplished. You have people who have achieved more than I will probably achieve in my entire life. But you don't see them negotiating head-to-head with their male colleagues. You don't see them negotiating salaries or curriculum. You just see them telling you what you need to learn in school. Whereas in the business world, you have umpteen different women's networking groups telling you how to dress, telling you how to use strong language, don't use weak language, telling you how to support your women colleagues and make sure that you're not cutting each other down. And more than that, on a day-to-day basis, you're in meetings with other women who are interacting with people at their level and below, and at their level and above, and they're supporting their ideas, and they're explaining to people why they are right. And you know what? They are using weak language, and you see that. But you know what? They're using strong language, and you see that. And you see partners and different men. You see young people and older people. You see them all interacting and what it works and what doesn't work. You get to see over and over and over, multiple times a day, year after year after year, examples of what works and what doesn't work. You don't get that in college. So what we need to do is we need to create opportunities for our young women to observe confidence, to observe people projecting their value at a much earlier age, in college, in high school, but in middle school. Gosh, can you even imagine? Can you imagine a world where our 6th grade, our 12-year-old women project the same level of confidence that our 30 and 40-year-old managers project? I mean, think about it. Forget achievement gaps and gender gaps. We wouldn't need fair pay laws. We wouldn't need magazines telling us, hey, these are the 50 best companies for women to work at, because a great place to work would be a great place to work regardless of who you are. But until we are able to stand up and say how great we are, people aren't going to notice that. We need to strive for not just a future, but a today where we give our young women the tools to not only build that confidence, but to project it to everyone, to sing it from the mountaintops, to let them know and let the world know that they are every bit as valuable as we already know that they are. Thank you.